Good evening. It's 6:06 p.m. My name is Gabriel Harp, Chair of the Ann Arbor Energy Commission, and I'm calling this meeting to order, and I'm participating from my home here in Ann Arbor. Welcome to the Tuesday, November 12th electronic meeting of the Energy Commission. We'll conduct this meeting like in-person meetings. And commissioners, during the roll call, please indicate your current location. Also, during the meeting, please remain on camera just as you would be visible during in-person meetings. Finally, mute your microphone when not speaking. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call one of the following two toll-free numbers, 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099, and enter the meeting ID number 956-8718-7876 on your phone. This information is also available on the published agenda in public notices section of the city's website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 19 and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. Joe, would you mind please reading the land acknowledgement statement?
I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including Odawa, Ojibwe, Bodewadmi, and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained, generally in unconscionable ways, from indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Joe, would you please mind taking the roll call?
Yeah, one day we'll make that a more smooth transition. Should probably just go into that, huh? But all right. I just heard from Commissioner Colvin Garcia. They are running behind. They should be here in about 15 minutes or so, they said. All right. Commissioner Berkowitz. I didn't hear you, but I saw you come off mute and I see you there. So I'm going to call that good for now. Councilmember Briggs. See.
Yes, here.
Thanks. Chair Harp.
Here from my home in Ann Arbor.
And I mentioned Commissioner Colin Garcia is running a little behind. Vice Chair Hans.
Here from my home in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Levin.
Here from my home in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Mirsky.
Here from my home in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Overpeck.
Here from my home in Ann Arbor.
And Councilmember Redina.
Here in Ann Arbor.
All right, Chair, you got a quorum.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as posted and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioners, please raise your hand if you want to propose any change to their discussion issue. Seeing no hands raised, all those in favor of approving the agenda posted, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the agenda is approved. Is there now onto the minutes, is there a motion to approve the minutes as posted and a second?
Motion to approve.
Commissioner Hans?
Second.
Commissioner Mirsky. Commissioners, please raise your hand if you'd like to propose any changes or discuss an issue. And seeing no hands raised, all those in favor of approving the minutes as posted, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
And the minutes are approved. Thank you. Okay, moving on, we'll move on to our public input opportunity, which is an opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you're watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 956-8718-7876. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. To electronically raise your hand, to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. And when speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Caller ending in 134.
Thank you, Mr. Lang and Chair Harp. Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. I'm looking forward to the staff presentation. Several questions in advance. First, the slides show a 3% decrease in emissions to just under 2 million metric tons, but the OSI web dashboard shows a 1% drop to just over 2 million. Which is right? Even at 3%, emissions are down only 1.4% a year since 2019. Second, the entire decrease is in the electricity sector. How much of that is from DTE's improved carbon intensity? Renewables aren't the only factor there. DTE closed 2 coal plants at the end of 2022 and carbon intensity fell. This benefits our 2023 Scope 2 emissions, but not because of anything we did. Third, this inventory ignores Scope 3 emissions, which are probably the majority and probably rising. I realized ICLEI doesn't have these, and I know it's hard, but will we start to consider them next year? Lastly, slide 10 says that population is increasing, but US Census online data shows a decreasing population, down 3.6% from 2020. What is OSI's source? Well, those are my questions. Also some observations. First, solar. In 2023, we added 2 megawatts of new solar capacity. I calculate this will reduce our emissions by 1,600 metric tons a year. That's great. But in 2023, we also approved over 1 million square feet of gas-heated residential and commercial new construction. I calculate that when complete, these buildings will add 7,600 metric tons emissions annually just from gas combustion. Reduced commuter emissions will bring that down to about 6,000 tons. But that's still almost 4 times more emissions each year than we're saving with the new solar. This will show up in future inventories. So new buildings are wiping out the gains from new solar several times over. For existing buildings, fewer than 10% of conversions are to heat pumps. On transportation, we're going in the wrong direction. The goal is to reduce vehicle miles traveled, VMT, in half by 2030. Instead, VMT are up for the 3rd year in a row, back to 2018 levels, with transit use down 30%.
30 seconds.
Trips by walking, biking, and bus are 42%, down from 52% in 2019. Basically, our emissions come down to 2/3 buildings, 1/3 transportation. OSI will disagree, but despite the hard work from staff, we're failing in both areas. Can new programs turn these around? I hope so, but we need large and fast reductions. In my comment at the end, I hope to talk about why we're failing and what we can do about it.
Thank you. Caller ending in 010.
Hi, this is Wayne Appleyard, a former member of the Energy Commission. I live out of town. I totally agree with what Ken just got through saying, but I want to add a few other things. First of all, I think I would strongly recommend everybody look at the website, which has more detailed information, although it's nowhere near as good as the 2019 and 2020 reports that were done that were about 26 pages long that really got into the weeds and really helped you understand what was going on. Certainly, as Ken said, the fact that only 9% of the new heating systems are heat pumps means that for the next foreseeable future, probably 20 years, we're going to be emitting large amounts of GHGs from burning natural gas. The other thing to understand is that the data that's shown doesn't seem to look at how year to year heating degree days and cooling degree days affect things. And so without that comparison year to year, you're going to get misleading information, because certainly heating and cooling are major forces producing greenhouse gas emissions, and they vary by up as much as 20% year to year. One other thing is, I hate the use of percentages. And for some things you have to do that, but it's always a percentage of what. And if the amount of material changes from year to year, the percentage might look better, but you may not have done anything differently or made any improvements. It's just what you're comparing it against went down. So you really need to have concrete data on that. And I think that's all I have to say. Good night. So it is wonderful that you're actually putting this information out. It just has to be better. And if you want the great things about percentages, you can look at the 1954 publication, How to Lie with Statistics. Not insinuating that anybody here is doing that, but it just shows you how the way you present things can modify how things appear. Thank you.
Thank you. No further callers.
Thank you. Okay, and with that, we'll move on to the presentation and discussion for this evening's meeting, which is a presentation on Ann Arbor's 2023 greenhouse gas inventory. And Carissa Ebling, I hope I have that right, Ebling, will be presenting tonight. Joe, maybe I can hand it to you to sort of introduce the speaker and kick it off briefly.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah, thanks, Carissa, for joining us. Do you want to just put some context just so we're all kind of on the same page? Just noting, Carissa has been an energy fellow with our team for a bit, but has just recently stepped into her new role as energy coordinator. Carissa will be taking over all the data metrics and reporting around that end. With that, and pertinent for discussion tonight and questions tonight, do just want to note that, this version of the greenhouse gas inventory, the 2023 one, was completed by Thea before Thea left the team. So just noting that as, Chris is going through, getting up to, already has a lot of really great skills, but just because she didn't necessarily go through this particular inventory, if we have some questions, it might take a little bit longer to get back to folks, as we might need to go back and check the work and all that kind of stuff for what Thea did. But going forward, Chris will be doing these and is going to keep doing it on, a lot of the great work that's been taking place, and is going to talk about what we've got this year. So with that, I will turn it over to Carissa.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. And I'm also going to do my best to answer some of the questions that the callers called in with as I go through this presentation. So hopefully I will be able to answer most, if not all, of those questions. Sorry, give me a moment while I share my screen. All right, can you all see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, so I'm going to be going over the City of Ann Arbor's 2023 greenhouse gas inventory. My name is Carissa Ebling. I am a new energy coordinator with the City of Ann Arbor's Office of Sustainability and Innovations. I actually only started full-time and permanent about a month ago, so I'm pretty new to this role and this work. And as Joe mentioned, I am not actually the person who completed this inventory, but I am going to do my best to talk through it today. So a little bit of background on our inventory. Our inventory is estimated annually. It's based on aggregated, scaled, and or modeled data, just because we have limited data available to us. So there's inherently a little bit of error, but we do our best to use the most accurate data sources that we can. Our inventory is also calculated using the ICLEI US Community Greenhouse Gas Protocol. The ICLEI protocol is used nationwide and allows inventories to be compared easily from city to city because cities are using the same methodology to complete their inventories. Also, if every city were to complete an inventory using this protocol, part of the point of it is that if every city were to do that, those inventories could be added together to get the total emissions for a certain region. And then the greenhouse gases measured in our inventory include carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. So every year we complete two different inventories. One is our simple inventory and the other is our expanded inventory. So our simple inventory dates back to the year 2000, but it only includes emission sources for which data was available at that time. So our expanded inventory doesn't go back quite as far. It only goes back to 2015, but it includes additional emission sources, so it's a bit more accurate. So this graph shows our simple inventory trends. And again, our simple inventory dates back to our baseline year 2000. So you can see that there's a pretty big drop in emissions since the year 2000 to the year 2023. We saw a 27% drop between our baseline and 2023. There was also a pretty big drop in 2022, and that was due to the pandemic. And then from 2022 to 2020 to 2022, you can see emissions increasing as we're kind of recovering from that pandemic and transportation is increasing. And then from 2022 to 2023, we saw emissions begin to go down again. So this chart shows the sectors that are associated with our emissions reductions. So a big portion of our emissions reductions since the year 2000 have come from commercial buildings and the University of Michigan's buildings, but reduction in emissions from residential buildings and local transportation have been pretty significant since our base year as well. So this graph shows our expanded inventory trends. Like I mentioned, our expanded inventory doesn't go back to the year 2000, it only goes back to 2015, but it does include some additional emission sources. But you can see a pretty similar trend as with our simple inventory. So since 2015, our emissions have decreased pretty significantly. And then again, you see that big dip in 2020 due to the pandemic. So this chart breaks out our greenhouse gas emissions by source. So about 2/3 of our emissions in Ann Arbor come from buildings, and that includes Michigan's buildings, the University of Michigan's buildings, commercial buildings, and residential buildings. And then the other 1/3 of our emissions mainly comes from transportation. So this graph shows our 2023 greenhouse gas emissions broken out by source. So the majority of our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from electricity, but a really significant portion of our emissions are also coming from natural gas and gasoline/diesel fuel. So this graph shows our simple and expanded inventory trends with a linear projection line to our 2030 goal. Something that's really important to note is that this graph and our inventory in general does not include things like renewable energy credits or My Green Power because we follow that ICLEI protocol. Like I mentioned, the point of the ICLEI protocol is that if every city were to complete an inventory, those inventories could be added together to get the total emissions for a certain region. So adding things like renewable energy credits would lead to double counting because that energy is actually being produced elsewhere. So all that to say that the slope of this projection line looks a bit steeper than it is in reality with things like renewable energy credits and my green power taken into account. So as we look at these trends, some things to keep in mind are that many programs are in the early stages. We're also still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. Our population tends to increase year to year. The caller who called in mentioned that our population didn't increase from 2022 to 2023. That is correct, but it does tend to increase on a yearly basis, and we do get that data from the census. And then our energy fuel mix is currently largely still fossil fuels. And then again, like I mentioned, our inventory does not include things like renewable energy credits, my green power, or offsets, which will play a role in achieving our A20 goal. So it's important to take that into consideration as well. So just to dive into a little bit more detail on some of those points, this graph shows our emissions per capita since the year 2000. So as you can see, our emissions per capita have decreased really significantly since that 2000 base year. And then this chart shows our energy portfolio for 2023. We had about 19% of our emissions coming from renewable sources in 2023. Keep in mind that this graph does include things like renewable energy credits and my green power, which again are not included in our inventory. For our inventory calculations, actually only about 12% of our energy is coming from renewable sources because that's a portion of DTE's energy that's actually being produced from renewable sources rather than being bought through renewable energy credits. Something to note is that DTE is required by this state to have 50% of their energy coming from renewable sources by 2030. And then our sustainable energy utility proposal was also passed last week. So all of that will lead to significant increases in our renewable energy portfolio in the coming years. I also wanted to show this chart with DTE's fuel mix. So since 2015, the amount of energy that DTE actually produces from renewable sources has gone up about 4%. And then from 2022 to 2023, their renewable energy percentage went up a little over 1%. And again, that's the energy that they're actually producing from renewable sources. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is our metrics dashboard. So this dashboard showcases our progress towards our E20 goals. We're currently working on updating the data in our dashboard, so most of the graphs should be updated, but if you see anything in there that isn't, know that we're working on it. And then I've included a link to it here. I'm actually going to go ahead and click on it so we can explore it a little bit together. So this first page is just an introduction. It explains what the dashboard is, how to use it.
Just noting the screen didn't change with you when you.
Oh, so sorry. Thank you. Is that better?
Yep, perfect. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, so this first page, again, is just an introduction to the dashboard, what it is, why it was made, how to use it. And then this next tab goes into detail about our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So a lot of what I talked about today. It breaks out our inventory by sector, by source, and by subsector. So if you want to take a deep dive into that, I definitely recommend checking this out. And then these next few tabs have data associated with each strategy outlined in our A20 plan. From our 100% renewable energy goal to things like the circular economy and community resilience. If you want to explore the data that we're tracking, and that is associated with those strategies and the goals in those strategies, I would definitely recommend taking a look at this. But that was all that I had. So I can try to stop sharing my screen, sorry. So like Joe mentioned, I am a little bit new and I didn't actually complete the inventory, but I can do my best to answer any questions that you all have.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, if commissioners have questions, please raise your hand and I'll try to circle around and get some time for everyone. John, you had something you want to raise?
Yes, I submitted a number of questions in advance of the meeting. I didn't copy the whole commission, but I did send it to Joe and Carissa, as well as Chair Harp and Vice Chair Hans, as well as our two council members. I was hoping that you might be willing to go through those questions and the responses. I don't really think it makes sense that I repeat them here. You, Carissa, provided me a set of responses, and I think it would be instructive, since we're only 30 minutes into the meeting or so, that maybe you go through those, because I think that may be a lot more efficient than just taking questions randomly from the other commissioners. That's just my thought. Chair Harp, that's entirely up to you.
You're muted there, Chair Harp.
You're not
You're muted.
You're muted still.
Sorry. Okay, maybe we'll turn back to that and we can hear from council members on some questions as well, and then follow up with some of those, responding to some of those questions.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to suggest, if Carissa has already drafted responses to the written questions, I wonder if it might be valuable to just have those shared out by staff to the entire commission so that folks can read through them as well and have them with them, rather than having to have her read through all of them here. I also just wanted to note, and I apologize to all of you in advance, that Councilmember Briggs and I have a work session that begins at 7, so at some point we will drop from the meeting. And so when you notice us fall off, just wanted to give you that heads up.
Forward those now. But if there's any, Chris, if you want to touch on any, feel free. But yeah, we'll go ahead and forward those so everyone has them.
John, were there any, Commissioner Mirsky, were there any that were particularly pressing in your mind, they're worth?
Well, let me preface any of the questions that I think are important with just a comment or two. So first of all, I want to make clear, I think, I hope it's evident to everybody that I and other commissioners, as well as climate activists like those that are calling in, are on the side of greenhouse gas reductions. We're on the side of everybody's efforts. We're on the side of OSI. We're just hoping that we can move faster and smarter and better, so that we can achieve our goals. And in several cases, as you heard from some of the people calling in, and as you'll see for some of the questions, we have concerns that that may not be the case. In particular, I think that's important. I want to have everybody recall that Commissioner Peck, I think it was in our January meeting, talked about tipping points. I'll touch on what I think are 2 tipping points. There was a letter that was signed by 82 climate scientists just within the last couple of weeks, with concerns about the current, I forget, the AMOC, I think is the term that's used, that it is, there's more and more evidence that that is breaking down. That was one of the tipping points that Dean Peck highlighted. The other tipping point that I wanted to mention, why I think our work is so important and that of other jurisdictions, states, etc., is the result of the last elections. And I would say, what Peck talked about was physical tipping points, if you will, and we see that there's going to be a political tipping point. And I'm very concerned about what that means. And so it's really, really, really important that we meet our targets. Some may be unrealistic, but I think there's a lot of actions in the 820 plan that are really significant and constructive. And I think it's really important that we meet those targets. And therefore, when we're looking at some of these concerns, some of these questions, I think what we're saying here is that we need to work together collectively. We're also residents. We're the ones that are also implementing these plans as well with our own actions, and that this is really, really important. So the one question that I have is one that was highlighted by Commissioner Garber, and that is that if you look at the trend lines that were shown on slide 9, and granted those don't show My Green Power and they don't show REX, but they show more or less a pretty consistent rate of reduction since 2000, since 2015, since 2019. And while we may have reduced 27% since year 2000, we have, if you look at what we need to accomplish by 2030, we need to achieve a dramatically faster rate. And if you look at our rate of reduction since 2019, it's only 1.4%. And I want all of us to be cognizant of that. And then when we look at what we're talking about with various programs that we talk about in our meetings, My Green Power, excuse me, not My Green Power, but the greenhouse, the green rental housing program, where we have two-year delay in implementing that, where we've had other delays in other programs. These are things that are really having a negative impact on our ability to reduce emissions. So, I mean, I just think that we're presenting, frankly, an overly optimistic view of what we're accomplishing. And I want us to be focused really on outcomes and what those outcomes are telling us. So I guess there's not any one particular question that I have. I really encourage people to look at the dashboard and to look at where we are accomplishing what we've accomplished. I mean, just a couple of things. Transportation was pointed out, and we're not making the kinds of shifts in transportation that we need to make. You look at the number of heat pumps that are installed, 9%, both residential and commercial. That means 91% of the HVAC systems that were installed that are natural gas based are going to be emitting greenhouse gases for the next 20 years. These things are really catastrophic. And I think we need to bring these across to Ann Arbor residents that we're just collectively not moving fast enough. So, I mean, I'll leave it at that. I won't repeat all the questions. Everybody's going to see those questions. Everybody will see those responses. I have concerns with some of the responses. One last thing I'll mention is the benchmarking ordinance. There's a statement in the response that the benchmarking ordinance is basically just now going into effect. Well, that's going into effect now instead of 2.5 years earlier because of a dated submission problem. So, I mean, I can go on and on. I just hope that all of us pull together. I hope in particular our council members are recognizing these issues. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Joe?
One quick note on that benchmarking one I can put in there as well. That the numbers in there were for the enforcement deadline for this year, not previous years. It's been in effect, it's been going. In context of the report, you are correct on that end. But in terms of the dates that are in that response, that is for the reporting deadline for this current year.
And we should have had reports for the 2 prior years, and those have yet to be issued.
That's correct. And I was saying, yes, correct in that sense. We're working on getting that out for you. But just noting that the dates that were in there, the enforcement deadline dates were for this reporting deadline. But yes, hear you on that. We're working on getting a report for you and presented to the Energy Commission as soon as we can.
Other commissioners, council members, any clarifications, questions or comments? Commissioner Overbeck? I think you're on mute.
I think it's wise for us to all agree with John and Commissioner Mirsky and our other colleagues who have spoken up, and come to some resolution about how we communicate where we are and where we need to go. Not really dwelling on the negatives, as John was trying to make clear. We don't need to do that, but we need to acknowledge them, and really present things in a realistic fashion to the citizens of Ann Arbor, so that we as a community can decide on whether we're serious or not about carbon neutrality. And this is not just a problem for Ann Arbor, this is a problem for the nation and the globe. I mean, that's what they're talking about in Azerbaijan. I can't say that word. In Baku, right now, is trying to get our ambition levels higher. And the question is, how can we do that? Just changing our tracking and doing kinds of things that we're already planning, it's not enough. So we have to somehow decide as a group, and convince council and to do that, we have to convince our fellow citizens that we're more serious than we are. And I, for one, agree with this. We have a similar problem going on at the University of Michigan. I don't think it's as serious, in part because our goals are more realistic. But nonetheless, we need to keep our ambition high. And I was doing the state climate council today too. And, we got to do the same thing at the state level. And all these are getting harder with the new administration. And we need to be really clear that, yeah, it may be harder, but that doesn't mean we're going to just give in and not do the job. That's my 2 cents, just sort of saying I agree. And I think we need to come to some kind of consensus here, what we're really trying to do. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in just with a couple of clarifications and questions and a couple of comments. One, which is, if I heard you correctly, Carissa, the institutional buildings is entirely composed of the University of Michigan. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And so, I mean, one might just be so one comment that follows from that is that we might want to just communicate that as directly as we possibly can, because if that's the category, it's U of M. Sort of putting it behind institutional buildings sort of somewhat obscures the source. And so that might be an opportunity for us to sort of better partition and communicate where some of the impacts come from. Related to that is sort of a question in between 2022 and 2023. It looks like the largest share in that drop was contributed by the drop in institutional buildings. If I'm reading the percentages correctly in the expanded inventory trends. And so part of that was, in my mind, there was a question going from 2022 to 2023 of, what impact, for example, might the millage that passed a few years ago have had on lower emissions relative to other sort of drivers of that, and sort of what I'm starting to pull out is maybe it's what's happening with the university and what they're doing with their buildings and things like that. So I guess that's just a question or a clarification there, if that's accurate, as sort of first question.
Yeah, so we did see a pretty big reduction in emissions from institutional buildings. We also saw a reduction in emissions from residential buildings and a slight reduction in transportation as well. So I would say that you're correct, that there was a significant reduction in institutional buildings, and that's likely due to the University of Michigan's efforts to decrease their carbon emissions. But also noting that we did see reductions in emissions from residential buildings, which may be attributed to some of our programs that have been implemented or that were implemented in 2023, like Solarize. and things like that. So
Yeah, that's great. And another quick clarification. Re residential buildings, could you describe again what makes up residential versus commercial? And part of what I'm trying to get at is multifamily housing also included under commercial as well, or is that included under the residential?
yeah, so multifamily buildings would be included under commercial. It has to do with how DTE classifies the building, but I believe it would be buildings with more than 4 units. I would have to check on
Yeah.
that, but
Okay.
it would include most multifamily buildings under the commercial sector.
That's great. I just wanted to clarify that for everyone's benefit. Okay,
Totally.
thanks. John, did you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, if I can piggyback on that conversation. One question that I have, you mean, obviously the University of Michigan is dominant. It has 40,000 square feet under roof. But I assume that there are a couple of other institutional players. One is Concordia University. The other is Ann Arbor Public Schools. I don't know where they fall, but it would, to Chair Harp's comments, it would be really nice to have that clarification, either footnoted or something like that. So if indeed institutional is only U of M, then it should be clear. If it includes some of those other institutions that I mentioned, that should be mentioned. It's probably only 5 or 8% of the total, so it's not all that significant. One thing that I think would be very helpful, and as I recall previous presentations of the inventory, is to simply split out the university from the city, because I think it's really important to see what the university is doing on its own scope 1 and scope 2, as versus what the city is doing for scope 1, 2 as well, and 2, as well as some scope 3. But some of the, to try to split that out as cleanly as we can really then attribute to which entity is being more effective than the other and where we need to concentrate our efforts. That's all.
If I might just build on that additionally as well, one of the things that comes across in the communications of this is I wonder what kinds of benchmarks for comparisons are we using? And on one hand, it's a question about how we're communicating this. So on one level, in many of the graphs, particularly in the dashboard, the A20 goal is listed. For what we're sort of aiming for. And to some of the earlier comments about the progress that we're making year after year, I wonder what the difference between that ultimate goal is, but also do we have sort of other intermediate targets set as part of A20 that might also help us get there, and how are we understanding those? So on the one hand, it sounds like Commissioner Mursky is suggesting that there's a benchmarking or comparison between the city and the university, for example, but others might also imagine other kinds of benchmarking or comparisons, say similar municipalities or other kinds of entities that we might want to compare ourselves against, partially for the sake of comparison, but also as a source of, I think, motivation for how to get there in some ways. So that might be something that's worth considering, at least in terms of how we set up, how we communicate some of the information and contextualize it. Because as we look at the graphs, we're comparing the sort of total million megatons of CO2 equivalents. But we don't necessarily have a context for what that might be other than none. And so those could be other sort of useful comparisons that might have some instrumental social comparative value as well. Commissioner Hanstead, I see that you had a hand raised. I wasn't sure if you want to still had a question or a clarification.
Basically, I got my question answered. Thank you.
Other commission members? Yeah. Carissa, did you want to respond?
Yeah, just to kind of comment on some of the things that were said earlier. I think that a lot of the staff at OSI kind of share concerns about the changing political climate. But I think it's important to also celebrate wins, and we did successfully pass the sustainable energy utility last week as well. So it's important to keep in mind, I think, that that will end up having a really big impact on our emissions. It will really help us reach that 100% renewable energy goal, which is a huge, huge part of our A20 goal. And, you know, just as I mentioned, a lot of the programs that we've been working on are just in their very early stages. They're just getting implemented this year. So while we're not seeing the impacts of those programs yet, we will in the future, and we will see impacts of things like the SEU, which will really have huge impacts on our emissions.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Commissioner Mirsky?
Yeah, I just want to say, I hope other commissioners speak up. I'm trying to wait 5 or 10 seconds before raising my hand, so hopefully others that have questions don't feel that I'm crowding them out. I would ask that OSI review and come back to the commission, or maybe it can be even commented tonight. It's my understanding that DTE has not committed to 50% renewables. If you look at their resource plan that was recently approved by the MPSC, I don't think it reaches 50% by 2030. I know that the state has some targets, but if the MPSC is approving resource plans that don't correspond to that, as far as I know right now, the plan that's been approved for DTE only brings them up to 30-some% renewables. So that obviously will have a really significant impact on what we're seeing here in the city. And then finally, I agree completely. We should be celebrating everything that we accomplish. And the SEU is something that a lot of us have been working for and supporting for many years. I also want us to simply be realistic and to look at what successes we have and where we've really made significant progress, but also be realistic when we're coming up short. And if we're coming up short, what are we going to do proactively and not 2 or 3 years from now to be able to overcome and have offsets for the delays or the shortcomings that we have? That's all that I'm asking for. That's all.
Yeah, just to respond to the that 50% number that does come from a recent bill that was passed that is in effect, and noting that that came into effect after the most recent IRP that was filed by DTE. I think that was filed in July or something like that. This came in was it September, November, something like that in November 2023. So that's where that discrepancy is, that and that bill is in place. That is a requirement going forward. So that's what that is for, and that's what we're projecting based off of for some of those things. Not necessarily shown there, but a thing that is slated to take place.
Carissa?
Just noting in response to John, you know, it is really important for OSI to use data-driven approaches as we move forward and consider the data that we have, and that is something that we are trying our best to do. It's part of why we created the dashboard, to ensure that we are tracking all of that data and making it public so that everyone can see our progress. And we're also hoping to work on creating a Scope 3 emissions inventory soon, so that we can also track our Scope 3 emissions. So just noting that that data-driven aspect is really important to our office as well.
Any other clarifications or comments from commissioners? Okay. Well, I think with that, oh, sorry. Krista, did you want to add something else? Yeah.
Sorry. I wanted to try to hit on at least one of the questions that someone called in about earlier. There is a discrepancy between my slides and what is shown on the dashboard for our emissions for 2023. That is because before Thea left, as I mentioned, she completed the 2023 inventory, but she didn't have the updated fuel mix for DTE. So I updated that later on. So the value in our, the value in the presentation today is the more accurate value. And I will be updating that on the dashboard soon. So just noting that. Yeah, I think that's all I
Can I
wanted to mention.
ask a quick question about that? Can that be included in the inventory in future years, or somehow provided so that we have insight into that? And another caller also asked for some greater insight into heating and cooling days. And as was indicated, that really is significant, have a significant impact. So if we could see those two underlying factors, that would really be helpful in interpreting the data.
Yeah, I can absolutely work on it, incorporating heating and cooling degree days. I did actually have a slide on DTE's fuel mix for the presentation today. And I did consider including heating and cooling degree days, but ultimately decided not to try to keep the presentation a little bit more simplistic. But I can incorporate that in the future.
Maybe that can just go on the dashboard and you don't have to include it in the presentation.
Yeah, and maybe there's a broader question there also, which is, are the metrics themselves sort of so should we anticipate that there might be some additions to some of the measures and some changes to the types of measures as this matures? Or would we anticipate that this would stay sort of relatively static in terms of the dashboard, at least, and the types of things that are being measured for some of the different categories?
So in terms of our dashboard, we just significantly expanded our circularity team, which handles things like the circular economy and food. So we'll definitely be incorporating more data associated with those things onto our dashboard. So you'll see those changes in the future. In terms of other things, I think they'll remain relatively static unless we find other metrics that are relevant to measuring our success. And for our greenhouse gas inventory, just because we follow that HICLE protocol, we'll likely see that kind of procedure remaining the same for our inventory. I guess one thing that I would really like to add to the dashboard is something that more accurately shows our progress towards our E20 goal in terms of carbon emissions reductions. So something that actually includes things like My Green Power and renewable energy credits and offsets once we have them, so that shows a more accurate representation of where we're at in terms of achieving E20. Because their inventory really doesn't tell the whole story.
Vice Chair Hans.
Concur with Councilmember Mirsky on those data points, and just quickly thank Carissa for putting together this presentation. I think we see a lot of presentations, and I wouldn't worry about adding those extra pages of detail. It was still a succinct and clear presentation. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Carissa. Really appreciate the presentation, and we'll obviously be looking back and using the dashboard, I think, more intensively, I think, throughout the next year, and starting to refer to that and hopefully directing others towards that as well. And we really appreciate your thoughtfulness and intentionality around this as well. So thanks for taking the time and putting this together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and for asking such thoughtful questions today.
Okay, we will move on now to the staff report part of the agenda.
Yep, trying to find the right thing. Yeah, one thing, as kind of noted throughout, but just some progress on it and working on a broader update as we go. But as in relation to our rebates and home energy advisor, noting that October has been our biggest single month in terms of getting home energy rebates out the door, with over $100,000 being sent out in terms of rebate money. So far, we've also had 195 people who have received a free home assessment through the home energy advisor and getting their custom decarbonization plans. It is also still fielding calls for project assistance. There's no longer a wait list. And you can see also on the tracker on the rebate page, both of these programs still do have capacity, and any word or any help getting the word out is certainly welcome. Also, as people have mentioned several times here, and we've gone through, so I'm sure most of you are aware, but just in case anyone on the line is not, last week, Ann Arbor residents voted to authorize Proposal A, the creation of a sustainable energy utility. This sustainable energy utility, or SEU, will be an opt-in supplemental community-owned energy utility that provides 100% renewable energy from local solar and battery storage systems installed at participating homes and businesses in the city. To give a timeline sense, now that it's been authorized, the detailed final planning and design work to officially launch the SEU can begin in earnest, with the goal of the utility launch within 18 to 24 months. Any residents who are or businesses who are interested in enrolling in the SEU or being the first to hear about more informational sessions, public engagement opportunities, or other SEU related updates, they are encouraged to join the waitlist and monitor the SEU website at www.a2gov.org/A2SEU. That is all from me.
Thank you. I think we do not have council members here, so we will just move on to reports from from the Environmental Commission.
So the only action taken by the Environmental Commission in its last meeting was the approval of a resolution that I had previously mentioned in this group that had been had its first reading in the prior Environmental Commission meeting, which was the resolution in support of Michigan Senate Bill 228, which would return the regulatory responsibility for single-use plastics, in particular, like single-use bags, back to local governments. That passed unanimously, and it will now be up to City Council whether or not to take up that resolution. With the Republicans now in control of the Michigan House, it'll be interesting to see whether or not that will be considered at the state level or not. Although the Senate is, I believe, still controlled by Democrats, and it is a Senate bill, so at least it may advance there. So that was the only real significant agenda item, other than updates and things like that.
Thank you. Any other updates from commissioners? Commissioner Colvin Garcia.
Thank you. And I apologize for being late. I had some things that kept me late at work this evening. And this was a very good presentation today. I just want to share with the Energy Commission that as well, maybe not so new resident of Ann Arbor Charter Township, I am your neighbor now, your city neighbor. The township has published its climate report, And so we are in the process of putting together our very first public engagement meeting to review our climate report and to receive input from our community members about what the community priorities are based on the results of the report. The meeting will take place on November 21st at 7 p.m. at the Ann Arbor Charter Township Hall. You can just Google the address for Ann Arbor Charter Township if any of you are interested. We are fortunate to have a member from OSI who will also be present to help guide the meeting and the inquiry along. And so we are partnering with the work that has been done in the city and with OSI. We're very fortunate that Missy has made resources available for that. And so as far as like, you know, the scope 2, scope 3 emissions, that's part of like what we share, you know, as neighbors. And we're starting to see with this, it's a very small township. It's a small physical area, but still, you know, we'll see how this expands, you know, how literally the land surrounding Ann Arbor and the local governance around will be able to like integrate and learn from what the city of Ann Arbor is engaged in right now. I just want to share a little bit about that. And I'll keep you updated as things progress.
That's great. Thank you so much. Commissioner Mirsky?
I have a quick question. If there's any update on filling the open commissioner slots that have been open for a year and a half?
I don't have an update on my end. Chair Hart, if you want to talk about some of the work that y'all have been doing behind the scenes.
I don't have an update on that. Hopefully, I think my sense is now that we're past the election, that I think some conversations that have been happening to help move that along, I think hopefully can progress as well. So I don't have any updates on that at the moment. But I know it's being looked at, and my sense is that now that we're again past the election, I think that there might be a little bit more momentum to move things forward.
Have recommendations gone to the mayor's office from the Energy Commission?
We have not taken up any applications at this time we have not fielded any at this time. There have been a few folks who've reached out to me with interest, and hopefully folks have been reaching out to other commissioner members if they're expressing interest in serving on the Energy Commission. And I would encourage anyone who's listening or watching to consider perhaps submitting their candidacy for this for the commission. And but hopefully we'll have an update on that between now and the next commission meeting, or if not, hopefully the next commission meeting, because we do need to. Agreed. Okay, we will move on to, I think, the public input section, and then we'll deal with items for the next agenda and discuss what's on the plate for the next month and into the new year. Okay, so this is the second opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you're watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 956-8718-7876. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed, and city staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. To raise your hand and to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone, and you'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. And please move to a quiet area and mute any background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. And please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Caller ending in 134.
Thank you, Mr. Lang and Chair Harp. Ken Garber again. My thanks also to Ms. Ebling for her presentation and her answers. I've been watching 820 closely since inception. 4 years in, there's been resistance to change in every direction. Developers who say climate change is not their problem and who build their concrete and steel towers with massive embodied carbon, often heated by fossil gas. Building owners who ignore benchmarking. Builders and their unions who defend fossil gas and lobby Lansing to subvert a progressive energy code. Landlords who we fear will sue if we put teeth in green rental housing. And individuals like us who buy bigger and bigger vehicles and insist on driving everywhere. We need to frame this in a new way. Until now, the implied social contract has the government creating the conditions, mostly through a mix of subsidies and incentives with some mild regulation. Then institutions, companies, and individuals slash emissions because it's in their economic interest. No one needs to sacrifice anything. That's not working at the national level, and it's not working here. Even with cheap renewables, there's tremendous inertia in the system. You can't just go from a high energy density system with fossil fuels to low energy density with renewables for many reasons, some technical, some institutional. The price of renewables is just one factor. IRA incentives, even if they survive Trump, won't drive the changes we need. That's partly because vast sectors still require combustion, like steel, concrete, fertilizer, aviation, shipping. But also because our economy, both nationally and locally, has a growth imperative, and you cannot decouple growth from carbon emissions, at least not at the rate we need. There's nothing inevitable about the energy transition, and it's stalling at every level, with fossil fuel production hitting records last year, nationally and globally, as we blow through our Paris targets. So, what should we do? First, admit it's not working. Give up the fiction of no sacrifice. Climate action is not a win-win. In fact, we have already lost. The only question is how bad it's going to get. The longer we wait to cut our losses, the bigger the catastrophe. In my opinion, we need strong mandates informed by equity so that the biggest emitters, who are also the wealthiest, are forced to make the deepest cuts. That includes us as individuals. That's my manifesto. I think we need a vast collective effort on the scale of World War II, because what we're doing, including here in Ann Arbor, is not working.
Thank you. No further callers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to callers. Thank you, Joe. Last on the agenda is for adjournment is items for the next agenda. And just to refresh everyone, the current plan is a possible presentation, building on a bit on this presentation as well, but potentially a presentation of A20 challenges from OSI staff, and I think what hopefully could be a candid discussion among staff and commission members as a way of thinking creatively and productively about what kinds of things we might need to do to think about this and help open up some of the challenges to some thinking around that. That was one of the agenda items that I think Commissioner Overpeck suggested a couple meetings ago. And then the second was also hearing particularly from council members about possible priorities for the year ahead as a way of shaping the types of items that we tackle in cooperation with council and OSI, working around these things as well. So that's sort of what we have posed. We haven't done any work to pull that together fully yet for the December agenda, but that's what we were thinking about. Looking ahead to January, the idea would be, I think, trying to do some agenda setting for the year ahead as well as other discussions as needed. With that in mind, there's a couple of other topics I think that have emerged in some of the discussions, but I'll open it up to commission members for other items for the next or upcoming agendas. Commissioner Mirsky.
Me again. Three things. First of all, over a year ago, we considered a resolution that originally was proposed by Ken Garber about applying in effect, a carbon tax on new construction. That was considered by the commission in the first reading, was favorably, I think, received by commissioners, but we never had a second reading. I'd like to keep that on the radar and ideally try to take it up relatively soon. In the midterm, it was already mentioned that we've, as residents, passed a great ballot initiative to found an SEU. I think it would be really interesting for us to have a session where the commission had an opportunity to provide some feedback on plans on next steps for the SCU. We're supposed to be advising council on policy, and it would be really interesting, I think, for us to hear what is proposed and what we might, how we might react to that. So I'd like to see that maybe sometime a couple of months from now. And then the third point is, for background, I'd like to share, and I think I can do this. I met with Missy Stoltz and with Council Member Briggs and Council Member Radina in the summer of 2023. So it's maybe 14, 15 months ago, about concerns that I had with a number of A20 actions that were falling behind schedule, or we're not meeting the assumptions, timelines, and indicators of success in the plan. I pointed out that the A20 plan is been called from the beginning a living plan, and I made the proposal that we get an update of the plan, an official update. And so it's my intention to submit a resolution for our consideration calling for an official update to the plan. I was told at that time by all three of them that an update was not possible until 2025. Well, 2025 is around the corner. That will be the 5th anniversary of the plan. That will be halfway through the plan. We've had a lot of successes. We've had also some challenges where we've not been able to accomplish some of the things that were laid out. We know that there's changes at the state level. The SCU is going to be something that's really significant that wasn't in the plan. There's a lot of assumptions probably in the plan that are outdated. I think it's really important for us, for council, and for, frankly, residents to understand what the current lay of the land is, what the prognosis is. If costs are going to be substantially different, those should be laid out. So I'm going to be drafting a resolution calling for a formal update of the plan that I hope that the commission would approve and send on to council, where council will then ask for an official update to the plan. So those are the three things that I wanted to mention for possible future agenda items.
That's great. Thank you. And just by way of clarification, and probably this is an open question too for commission members, which is with respect to the resolution that was taken up by the commission last year that came from Ken Garber. And there was, I think, a bit of feedback also on the resolution, on that resolution, and the sort of need for updating. I'm wondering what the best process might be for building out some refinements or revisions to that would also perhaps improve it and its relevance, so its impact, whatever those might be. And I'm wondering from commission members, Commissioner Mirsky, others, what your thoughts on that might be.
If I may respond directly,
Sure.
You're correct. Now that you mentioned it, your memory is better than mine. So I would volunteer to go back and listen on video to the meeting with some of the points that were addressed, and get together with Ken and see if we can address those appropriately. If we think that we have issues that we can't overcome, then I would mention that. If we think that we can address those with new language and revisions to the resolution, then I would bring that back to Commissioner Harp for potential consideration for an agenda item on a future meeting. How's that?
Okay, yeah, and I'll just share that I'm happy to work with you on that as well. I know a number of comments I think came from me as well, as well as others, and also via email too. And I'm happy to build on those just in terms of some of the scope and framing and things like that as well. Great. Commissioner Colvin Garcia.
I have a question about if it's possible for OSI to address like changes in housing density due to the development that's been taking place over the last 5-7 years in the downtown area, as well as recently passed ordinances for like ADUs, like how that affects the A20 goals and what progress is being made in that regard. And if that's something that we can learn more about.
Okay. Great. I think this is also related a little bit to the economic development report that came out last year as well for the city, and some of the objectives associated not only with sustainability but also affordability and impact as well. So we may be able to sort of connect some of those threads as part of that.
If I can chime in, I think that's a really important point. That is something that could be considered in an update to the A20 plan. One of the assumptions in the A20 plan was that the city would add 2,000 housing units, and that is likely to be far surpassed. So that is something that that would be an avenue to be able to address the point that Carlene or the Commissioner Calvin Garcia is bringing up. And so, yeah, I think that's an important point that we could consider possibly in that the way that I suggested, or potentially other ways as well. I mean, the other thing is obviously we've passed TC1 zoning revisions that could bring about dramatic changes to the transit corridors, South State, Plymouth, Washtenaw Stadium. So, that also is just, something that's a major change from 2020 when the plan was first conceived.
And then to add a little bit onto that, it's the occupancy, like how we're doing with occupancy with all this development.
Great. Great suggestions. Others from commissioners? Okay. Well, with that, I will now adjourn the meeting, and we will follow up over the course of the next month with updates on the agenda for the next meeting. And please stay tuned. And also we'll follow up on anything else individually as needed too. So thank you, everyone. And it is 7:25 p.m. and as chair, I declare this meeting adjourned. Take care, everyone. Have a good week.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.